Hi.
Hello, how are you doing?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. I'm sorry for coming late. I had a stream and so it was kind of tough.
Yeah,
Um,
no.
yeah, so my name is Tim. Nice to meet you. I wanted to chat about worker co-ops, if it's fine with you.
Yeah, of course,
Uh,
that's perfect.
yeah, so I will maybe make like a contextualization of my argument. And so I am somewhere between being a socialist and a social democrat. I'm
Well,
still
one
part.
sec. Before we do that, I think it's a good idea if you can just introduce yourself very briefly to the audience, just so
Oh, yeah,
people know who you are.
of course. So my name is Tim. I am from Czech Republic. I study in London at UCL, and I'm also a streamer, YouTuber. I'm doing some kind of debate bro lefty thingies in my local language because I wanted to introduce this concept of political streaming into our country, which is extremely conservative and extremely radical right wing. So this is my goal, and yeah, and so I found you through Vosh. I wanted to discuss your research on the topic because I have still a lot of questions which I think were not answered in the document, and I hope
Mhm.
that you could help me out with it.
Yeah, of course, I'll answer to the very best of my ability.
Thanks. So the first question I have is basically, what are the, let's say, explanations for the reason why they're not growing that much? So I know that you explained that it seems like for the relative size of theirs, they are growing quite extensively, and you disputed with the Olson research that indeed, in some cases, yeah, it's not about productivity. But so what's the primary reason why that's not the case? So like, why don't we see like multinational corporations that would dominate the market extensively? And so why is that the reason?
Yeah, so the main reason that I would probably guess is that fundamentally, cooperative systems aren't the typical business structure for a capitalist economy, and what we currently live in is effectively a capitalist economy, right? And the main reason why it's not is that capitalism fundamentally has a lot to do with external ownership and shareholders and stuff like that. That's kind of
Mm-hmm.
part of the core, yeah, the part and parcel of what makes capitalism capitalism. And because of the way that cooperatives function, they can range from having no external shareholders whatsoever, where nobody outside the firm may own any part of it, to having a situation where some external shareholders can hold shares and even vote, but they will always be a minority compared to the people that own shares in the firm that actually do work at the firm. So, because of that, there are some pretty significant barriers to growth and to start for these companies because cooperative companies essentially cannot utilize the same means of capital acquisition as
Mm-hmm.
traditional firms can because they're effectively left out of having external shareholders because it goes against the entirety of an idea of a cooperative firm. So it's difficult to get the huge kind of startup revenue that you might not revenue startup startup budgets that
Like
you will
investment
need to
capital.
create a new company. Exactly, investment capital, because one of the major avenues of getting that through perhaps getting on some external shareholders on board and having them pay into it a bit and make some investments, that's off the table for them. And then there's also cultural and social things, like a lot of people don't even know about working cooperatives as a means of business. A lot of it's not seen as something like oh, I want to start a business. Maybe I should start a co-op. Isn't really something that's like commonly thought about. In some regions, the kind of like legal codes and situations for worker cooperatives are a bit difficult. And yeah, all these things kind of make a combination where it's kind of more disincentivized to create a worker co-op as compared to a conventional firm.
Yeah, which brings us to the solutions that you provide. I think they're quite good. And I
Mhm.
actually had a debate with an anarcho-capitalist, which is interesting because this guy completely dominates the, let's say, Czech debate sphere. Like he's really good when it comes to rhetorics. And
Mhm.
one of the arguments that he made was like, number one, how would you then statistically learn or discover whether these co-ops work? Because basically, then you skew all the statistics, right? So like, instead of observing them on a free market and determining why they're successful or not successful, you're basically like introducing an intervention, and then we do not know really whether they will be successful or not, right? So like, how would you then understand or like describe or evaluate why these companies are good or not?
Yeah, so it depends on what type of solutions and stuff we're talking about, right? So I think the one that is most applicable to what he's talking about is probably the tax incentives, because many of the
Mm-hmm.
solutions that we have prescribed doesn't have anything to do with that, right? So the creation of cooperative educational and training programs won't really skew the statistics. It's just more knowledge and more education. Funding of research into cooperatives, which isn't really like proliferating their, it isn't really increasing the proliferation, but more like a research thing. Loans for employees willing to buy firms from owners, not necessarily going to skew the proportion and the performance of the worker co-ops, just going to make them more likely to be created, but they may still fail, and other things to kind of like get them started off of the ground. The only one that really kind of directly benefits them when it comes to them already being in operation are the tax incentives for cooperative firms that would kind of like encourage their growth. And for this, that is it's a valid concern to have. And I would say that it would be unreasonable to continue these tax incentives into perpetuity unless, and this is kind of where the anarcho-capitalism thing differs from a maybe like a social democratic framework, you see that there are values to worker cooperatives that go beyond just being competitive that you want to maintain. So if you're an anarcho-capitalist, for instance, you might be fully and entirely concerned about competitiveness at first and foremost, and pretty much at the exclusion of everything else. However, if you are maybe you have like a more social view of what you want to kind of encourage in your economy, you might see that, okay, cooperatives may not be quite as efficient, quite as competitive. However, they provide some really cool benefits to the people that work in them and to the local communities in which they're situated in specific industries. So we're fine with subsidizing them a bit. We're fine with kind of like boosting their competitiveness a bit artificially through given tax incentives. But that's okay because they're able to accomplish something that conventional firms aren't able to. So that's the thing, that there isn't necessarily something bad with it. But if you want to purely measure the competitiveness of cooperative firms, and that's going to be the thing that you want to talk about first and foremost, then it can be a difficulty, but I don't think it's something that is like a fundamental impossibility with having these tax incentives. There's no way to study whether or not they succeed. They could be time-limited tax incentives, or you could do like a number of statistical things in order to try to adjust for the benefits given by the tax incentives and seeing how they kind of scale up if you try to like create like a counterfactual in which those tax incentives didn't exist when it comes to their margins and stuff like that. But then a question I would ask back to that person then would be like, but we already see right now that there are a bunch of barriers to the creation of worker cooperatives that don't have to do with competitiveness first and foremost. So, such as, for example, the cultural and social things I was talking about before, right? How it's not really seen as something that is, that is like, I'm going to create a business. I'm going to create a co-op, you know? It's not really like standard thinking. It's more like a standard startup firm, you know, or whatever, where you try to seek outside investment through that thing. And there are fairly few support structures in society for the creation of worker cooperatives and for their startup. So just because they may not be able to benefit as competitively from the conventional startup structures that exist within capitalism, doesn't mean that those startup systems that exist within capitalism are the best or should be the only startup systems that we have. Maybe it's worth looking into other systems of like, you know, government loans and stuff like that for firms such as worker cooperatives to get them off the ground, if that's something that we see that we want to do in a society, basically, given us analyzing like what they do well and what they don't do well.
Well, I actually agree with everything you say, so it makes a lot of sense to me. So you were saying that like, but do you actually believe that they can be as competitive like outside, let's say, a capitalist framework? So assuming, I don't even know what is your utopia, to be honest, so I don't want to assume anything here, but like, if, let's say, capitalism was dismantled, as, you know, some people will claim, does it mean that we would actually have the same amount of, let's say, productivity and, you know, economic efficiency, or what would be the outcome of it?
Yeah, so the thing is, we have no idea. And that's why you said before, I don't know what your utopia is. And my answer to that is, I don't know what my utopia is either. What I do essentially, and the way that I like to do politics, is I like to look at what works and what we know and argue for what we know and what can yield good results. So I'm not going to, and I even specify this in my document, I think, the current literature on cooperative firms does not warrant blanket mandates for cooperative firms on the economy as a whole, or even specific sectors of it at this point in time. Because we really have no idea what it would look like if we got rid of all kind of capitalistic, standard conventional firms and replace them with worker co-ops. Because the results of that might be really, really bad. So it's not something that I feel comfortable advocating with. I want to make sure we have as much information as possible before we make especially such like radical policy decisions, such as getting rid of conventional firms, right? So when it comes to competitiveness, it's a very mixed bag. So in some cases, they've been seen to be able to outcompete some local firms. I should have read up on this document again before talking to you, but if I remember correctly, within agriculture, and especially some more local firms, they tend to do really, really well when it comes to outcompeting conventional firms. However, as the more macro they become and stuff within banking or whatever, conventional firms still do a lot better. But the main thing that we need to keep in mind fundamentally is that competitiveness is not the end all and be all of business structures. Competitiveness is extraordinarily important. Yes, 100%. The reason why we want competitiveness is because hopefully, given that the market is competitive enough and fair enough when it comes to the kind of regulatory frameworks that we've set up, that's going to drive the different firms to perform better, to make better progress, make better innovations, make their production process more efficient or whatever. And that's a good thing. However, worker cooperatives function differently to how conventional firms do. In that worker cooperatives, their primary goals and ambitions are to improve the quality of life for the workers there and for the community that takes part and interacts with the worker cooperative. And if you kind of like take it one level out and abstract it, competitiveness and the community building aspect of worker cooperatives are getting at the same thing, which is that we want to extract utility from our economy and from our businesses. If we're not extracting any utility to society, to human beings, then what's the point of having an economy, right? It's worthless, essentially. We need to keep in mind that the only reason we have an economy is because it benefits us, right? We don't want to have an economy for the sake of an economy. And a lot of people think that competitiveness is the only way to be able to extract utility from an economy or from a firm, when worker cooperatives extract utility from the firms, but in a different way to how conventional firms typically go about it. So we don't know exactly how much more competitive they would be compared to capitalistic firms. We see mixed results in different industries at the moment, but we don't have anything conclusive about it. But it's important to be open-minded in regards to, okay, so what do we really want out of our economy? And are there aspects and facets to our economy where we're going to prioritize the community benefits given to us by worker cooperatives, as opposed to maybe the slight edge out in competitiveness given to us by conventional firms?
Yeah, I think that's a fair approach to it in general. What do you think about like an argument that again was brought up to me in a discussion, which is that it is unfair to people who create their businesses in a different way? So I basically said that okay, there is one solution, which is, let's say, giving tax incentives or even giving loans under a different credit score. And the response from him was like, okay, but why should I, as a owner of a different business, receive different benefits, or actually, like, you know, being harmed comparatively to others? Why is like a different business structure illegitimate in the context of, you know, giving different benefits or actually not giving benefits? So is it even fair to provide something like that? And I'm just asking from like a principle framework.
Yeah, I would say absolutely, but I understand why the ANCAP wouldn't. So first of all, I think it's important to remove this discussion from the kind of novel field of worker cooperatives, because it's not just worker cooperatives that we're talking about, right? Fundamentally, what this argument is against is it's against the entire concept of government intervention in the economy. This really doesn't have anything to do with worker cooperatives. It's against the exact same argument can apply to anything such as subsidies or regulations or, you know, like tax penalties or burdens or whatever that are distributed unequally in an economy, which you're going to see unless you have like a complete flat tax of all businesses and no special incentives given to any different types of firms. And yeah, so that's essentially what he's arguing about. So it's important to keep that in mind. That argument is not an argument against just worker cooperatives. It's an argument against government intervention in an economy as a whole.
And then just a separate discussion, of course. Yeah, makes sense.
Exactly. So, and then that's why my response to that is going to talk about government intervention in the economy as a whole. And for me, it kind of links back to what I talked about before about the reason why we have an economy, right? I think it's perfectly justified, and I think it's A-okay, and I think it's a positive thing if the government intervenes in the economy, you know, shuffles around some incentives, gives some preferential treatment to certain companies, and maybe sanctions some other companies if it increases the benefit that we get as human beings from our economy. So, for instance, I don't think there's anything wrong if a government subsidizes a company making healthy foods and provides an extra tax, you know, weight on companies that make really unhealthy food, because of the externalities produced therefrom. So essentially, if the government does no intervention, then you're going to see more people probably gravitate towards the unhealthy food because it's a lot cheaper, and less people being able to afford the good food. However, if the government steps in there and makes the production process more efficient and easier for the healthy food company, and maybe taxes the unhealthy food company more, you're going to see a change in the consumption behaviors, where you see more people eating healthy food and then leading better lives. And I'm going to prioritize that outcome and that benefit to whatever kind of ANCAPian principle of unfairness they derive therefrom. Fundamentally, what I'm most concerned about when it comes to how we do our economy is how do we maximize utility in the society that is affected by the economy. And I'm in favor of doing whatever changes to the economy in order to further serve that goal or ambition. I'm not kind of held back, and I think these ideas of like silly juvenile ideas of, well, everybody needs to be treated equally or else it's unfair. I don't really care about them if that unfair treatment leads to worse outcomes at the end of the day.
Oh yeah, that's like a classical utilitarian perspective. I have the same view probably. Then my next question would be, how would it operate in different sectors of the economy? So Mondragon, or like in general, I'm sorry, there's some noise outside, so I hope you don't hear it. But
no, I don't hear anything, so you're
okay,
good.
Perfect. So so a lot of companies that you talk about in the paper are focusing on agriculture, or let's say French North sectors of the economy. And how would it apply to different standards? So I know that in Belgium it's kind of popular within the healthcare sector. But then I received a question from him, which was, how would I like when my YouTube channel would be, you know, co-owned by others, or let's say if I was forced to give up the ownership, right? So, you know, jumping to a different field, which we have not researched yet, which is like, you know, let's say video creation or something like that. How would you, I know that there are not a lot of studies, but do you think it would actually apply to different scale than just, let's say, agricultural companies?
So this is fundamentally an argument you only have to address if you're arguing for worker cooperative mandates right now. Otherwise, you can just say that, hey, depending on how the data shakes out, it's entirely possible that I may not be in favor of making worker cooperatives the standard for every, you know, firm ever within a you know, within the current economy that we live in. So that's the first thing that's important to recognize there. Now, when it comes to how it might play out in different fields, it is very complicated. Now, I don't have kind of like an ideological preference for worker cooperatives fundamentally. I like worker cooperatives when they lead to better outcomes, and I dislike them when they lead to worse outcomes. But I don't place any inherent value in worker cooperatives as a business types. So if it turns out that for whatever reason worker cooperatives just don't work for a specific type of firm or industry, then I'm not going to be in favor of worker cooperatives for that type of, you know, industry or whatever. An example of that would be, for example, video creation and public platforms like that. What differentiates a, you know, like an agriculture company from like a YouTube channel is that it's very specific when it comes to the weighing of the different people at that company, right? So an agriculture company, your product, what you're essentially selling, the core to your very operation is whatever agricultural product you're producing. You know, that's what's core to it. And a YouTube channel, the core is the person. The product is the individual who is producing, if it's like an individual YouTube channel, like most YouTube channels are. So the product is fundamentally different there than in other situations we have seen co-ops be put into place. And as such, I have trouble understanding how a co-op would work if it would work the exact same way with a YouTube channel as it would with, for example, an agriculture firms. It seems like there is a sufficient degree of difference there when it comes to what the actual core product or service of the different firm is, where the, you know, incentives might be a bit misaligned, because at the end of the day, right, if you have a agriculture cooperative and all the workers in the agriculture cooperative decides to vote out the, you know, whoever's like leading the company at the moment, whoever's the CEO or whatever, and gets in somebody else, that's fine. That agriculture company might even do even better now, right? That CEO might have been really bad. However, if you have a YouTube channel and the workers vote out like the person, like who the channel is named after or whatever, or who is the face of the channel, that you don't really have a channel, right? Unless you're able to somehow keep the brand going with somebody else, which is pretty difficult. So it doesn't seem to translate perfectly to all types of industry, although of course there are still things you can do to make YouTube channels more like worker cooperatives. So for example, things like revenue share is an excellent way to to create. So revenue share essentially is that instead of giving like a wage to the people that work, you know, with you on your YouTube channel, for instance, the way that it works is that you're just like, hey, we all contribute to the creation of the product and all the revenue we gain as on this YouTube channel. So this is what I do, for example, with Roserist. We all contribute to Roserist and to every like, you know, cent that is made with Roserist. So we're all going to get a share of the entire pie that we make here. And that kind of gets at some of the similar incentives that you're able to accomplish through worker cooperatives. Because the main thing about worker cooperatives that makes them efficient is that everybody has a vested interest in the success of what's going on. If you have a good month, everybody benefits. If you have a bad month, it sucks for everybody. So that way you kind of line up those incentives more when it comes to a YouTube channel compared to compared to like a worker cooperative there. So there are still things you can do with a YouTube channel, even though the direct translation is a bit murky, that make them more similar to worker cooperatives. That I think are beneficial there. So it's a complicated question, but once again, you are only forced to give an answer on this if you are arguing that everything should be made worker cooperatives right now, including
yeah,
things
that's not my argument. So that separation makes a lot of sense, to be honest. Actually, I don't know if you want to answer this question, but like you don't have to, obviously. So when you talked about your own experience, like your own channel and how you run it, so who then determines the prices, let's say, or like the wages? Yeah. So the benefit that I always describe with worker co-ops is that so like you vote for people and you also determine wages, etc. But then how would it happen in, let's say, a YouTube channel, right? So like what would be the procedures there, maybe?
Yeah.
And I'm literally asking this question just because I got it in the discussion with him.
Yeah, of course, no worries.
Sure what to do.
Yeah, it's a fair question. So the way that I handle this, and this is the main thing I can speak to, right? So Rose Wrist is worked on by 3 people. It's worked on by me, it's worked on by Marjorie Dominus, or Zoe, who does the editing, and then Antizer, who does my thumbnails. And the way that we have decided about the exact pricing, the exact splits and stuff like that, for the 3 people, like, which is not a lot of people to keep track of. It's just like it's one group chat, right? We just say then, and I've always been very clear with this and very deliberate with this from the very beginning, that like, hey, I want us to be able to have as open a conversation as possible about these things. If anybody of you are unhappy with anything that's going on with your payment or your revenue, please always bring that up. And like the way that we decide to compensate and split the compensation within the channel is basically handled through open dialogue by all 3 of us that work on this channel, essentially. Now, I'm under no delusions. I understand, obviously, that like my specific suggestions there are going to hold more weight than those of the other 2, because, at the end of the day, I am like Rose Wrist, the person, and I understand that, but then I also work within that, right? So I often try to encourage as much, and I don't know if Zoe or Antizer are here and they can attest to this, but maybe they disagree, which would be interesting. But I always try to promote like a communicative environment where anybody's free to talk and voice their what they think about, and when we decided on the things like the initial wages and the distributions and stuff like that, it was handled through like a conversation between all parties involved, not just me saying you're going to get this much percent and you get this much percent, and then you accept it or you leave. That's very much not the type of discussion and type of environment I'm trying to foster within my YouTube channel, what I do.
Then okay, so this actually leads to the next question that I have, and that is, it might be super simplistic, but I think the depth of it is a bit more than I'm just gonna say. So, how do I say this? So one of the reasons why you would opt for this kind of model, which you just described, is because it's beneficial for your company, or like for your channel, because everyone is more invested with their labor. They are, more pleased. They want to work there. They don't want to leave the company or the channel. I don't know how to say it. But then why wouldn't, let's say, owners of that company do the exact same thing with their corporations? So is it just because they're scared that they would lose the position? Or do some of them realize that they might actually improve? Or like, are they so stupid that they don't understand why that it's more productive for the workers to have something like that? Like, what's the reason why they don't convert?
The main reason is that the people that are power holders in today's conventional firms, they will be worse off in most cases under a worker cooperative company than what they are today. And that's why they don't want to do it. And this is true, and I accept this 100%. The CEOs of today, the shareholders of today, they will be worse off under worker cooperative society. However, everybody else will be way better off. So it's not like a stupidity or anything. It's a quote unquote rational capitalistic self-interest why you might not want to go and transform into a worker cooperative today. And this even applies to some extent to my YouTube channel, right? Because I'm sure I could say that like, hey, if you don't accept this wage, I'm gonna kick you out. I don't want you. And I can pay like a set wage if I wanted to. And I know that I would have plenty of other people that would be willing to do these jobs for me, that would be willing to edit for me, would be willing to do thumbnails for me, and probably would be willing to do so for much less than what Zoe or Antizer are currently being compensated at. But the reason why I don't do it, essentially, and this is gonna sound like I'm like tooting my own horn or whatever, but I mean, you asked me the question, so the reason why I do it.
You don't have to answer anything, by the way. Like, I'm just.
Yeah, I understand. But the reason why I do it essentially is because I think it's important that a work environment is good and healthy, and if it's something that I believe in, which I do, I believe in revenue share. I think that maximizes the well-being of all the workers within a given firm or company. Then it would be wrong. It would be hypocritical of me to not do so for the things that I have some control over, such as my YouTube channel. So that's essentially why I do it.
Okay, that's I think a really good answer. So then maybe this will not be necessarily about worker co-ops, but in general about the system. So when you talk about capitalist system, and you're saying that it creates certain incentives for people not to change or to, to keep the wealth and revenues. So how would you then change the system, right? So you're saying we should not ban all corporate ownership or all private ownership. So how would you do it in a different way? What would be, let's say, a systematic approach to it?
Yeah, so right now, and I'm sure you're probably aware of a lot of things I'm going to say now, given my policy prescriptions, but I can give the general summary of kind of where I'm at right now. So right now, what I see is that worker cooperatives do some really cool things that conventional firms do not and seem to be incapable of doing to the same extent. And some of these are demonstrated within competitiveness and like revenue and the ability to stay in business. A lot of them are concentrated within the community element of better quality of life for the workers, better compensation, more job security. And if it's a kind of both a consumer and worker cooperative, those benefits carry on to the entire community that is involved with this cooperative firm as a whole. And I think these things are really cool. And I think that there are reasons why a government would want to invest and promote them for the purposes of increasing the utility derived from our economy, right? However, the research we have on worker cooperatives right now are very scarce. We don't know how well they would perform on a large scale. We don't know even how they would perform in every industry. We have very limited research. So right now, the thing that I'm in favor of doing right now is essentially promoting policies that encourage the proliferation of worker cooperatives and making them more common and seeing how they perform within the economy and kind of getting like a vibe check of sorts on worker cooperatives and being able to say more concretely and make more concrete statements. Worker cooperatives are good at this in these industries in these ways. Worker cooperatives are bad at this in these industries in these ways, so that we can draft more comprehensive and more direct policy regarding worker cooperatives, so we can really try to get as much use out of them as a business structure as possible. Because right now, a lot of the ground that we're standing on is kind of shaky because there isn't a whole lot of research into cooperatives. So right now, my main goal, my main ambition is just to learn more about them so that we can make a more educated policy decision later down the line. And whether that decision be worker cooperatives are actually way worse than conventional firms, so we should get rid of them altogether, although that seems unlikely given the research we have right now, or if it's, hey, we should mandate worker cooperatives in every aspect of an economy, should that be demonstrated to be a good idea with the research? Whichever path we go, I have no predilections towards one or the other. I'm just going to follow wherever the research points towards there being the most possible utility and the most efficient and the most beneficial economy.
Okay, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense what you're saying. I'm sorry, I'm just saying yes because actually I don't have I don't disagree. I just want to learn more about them. So
no worries.
You're not bored by
Nope,
this.
It's perfect.
To be fair, I don't really have any more questions about this. I'm just generally curious whether you found something else since you published the document, as in like some new paper or new research or something else that would be interesting.
I would recommend looking at Unlearning Economics video on worker cooperatives. One of the issues that I had in my document was that I didn't, to a sufficiently good extent, to both my and Unlearning Economics opinion, differentiate between consumer cooperatives and worker cooperatives as different distinct types of cooperatives. And basically what Unlearning Economics does is he addresses that and brings in some extra aspects of analysis that he can provide by virtue of him, to my knowledge, having at least a master's degree in economics. So he can give more information basically about the worker cooperatives from somebody additionally as well that has more of an education as well on it, so that they can feel free to basically draw more extensive inferences from the data than I feel comfortable doing given my level of education. So I would heavily recommend Unlearning Economics video on worker cooperatives. And I think there's a segment as well around like 7 minutes in that video where he mentions my document and some of the things he found in my document as being helpful and as playing part in what he did for his video. So it's kind of, in a way, just like a next step, a part two, an improvement, a second part to the document and things that you've seen here. So if you found that interesting, absolutely recommend Unlearning Economics video on it because it's really good and it gives you even further and even more information about worker cooperatives than what I've talked to you about here today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks a lot. Makes a lot of sense. I'm gonna, once I finish my stream, I'm gonna rate your channel. Can you just tell me what's your name on Twitch so I know where to send people?
Yeah, that'd be nice. So Rose_wrist is my name on Twitch. But before we do that, just if there are any questions from your chat, then I'd gladly take them. I'll see if there's any from mine that I can answer right now.
There's one question from my chat, which is slightly repeating what I've said, but the guy literally told me that he is like newly keen. So, assuming worker co-ops are more effective, why should they be mandated?
Why should they be mandated?
Mm-hmm. Or like, let's say, not necessarily mandated, but rather like boosted through the economy. So, I guess the utility question that you just
okay. So so the question is if they are more effective, correct?
Yeah, assuming.
Okay. Well, if they are more, because the main, okay. So it's difficult because what makes a company good, what makes a firm structure good is going to depend because everything's so multifaceted. So competitiveness is one aspect, efficiency is one aspect, what's it called? Consistency and stability is one aspect. Worker satisfaction and well-being is one aspect. Community impact is one aspect. And like there's so many different aspects of being able to raise capital is one aspect. There's so many different aspects to companies and stuff like that. So given that they were more efficient, which I would assume and infer would mean more competitive, that would weigh the scales more in the favor of worker cooperatives, right? Because that seems to be one of the big question marks we have right now about worker cooperatives, which is that we don't know exactly how competitive they are with conventional firms in different industries. So if that question mark became a strong point in favor of worker cooperatives, then that would lean more in favor towards worker cooperatives being more appropriate and more applicable in larger parts of the economy. So it would get us closer and more on the side towards towards cooperative mandates. However, even if that were to be the case, that it were to be more efficient, there might still be other reasons why conventional firms may still be useful in certain industries. So for example, if we're talking about capital acquisition, it seems very difficult for cooperative firms to be able to ever compete with conventional firms when it comes to that front. One of the great strengths of capitalism is that it is incredibly effective in allocating resources and capital towards the elements of the economy where there is a demand. So in more, for example, like research and development areas of society and stuff like that, or more innovative elements and aspects of society, there might still be a value in having conventional firms occupy some portions of those sectors because of how easy it is to pump those industries full with capital really quickly without needing like a government to pick up on that, analyze that, distribute an appropriate amount of funds. You kind of have like a market deal with that instead. So it's complicated. I don't know exactly. It's difficult for me to say exactly what conditions need to be met for us to be able to support a mandate. For me, trying to accomplish a mandate isn't like a goal or an ambition. For me, it's just, hey, let's see how all the different different company types performs in different ways. And then let's try to create an economy where we try to extract as much value from these different types of firms in different places to see what essentially works best. So yeah, it's a bit of an indirect answer, but yeah.
I think it makes sense. Also, I asked the question from my chat. Now, if you want to read from yours, I'm more than happy to pay attention.
Yeah, so could you explain the difference between worker co-ops and consumer co-ops, and why is it necessary that we differentiate between the two of them? So worker co-ops, essentially the workers in the cooperative firm, are part of the worker co-ops, and essentially they run the firm, they vote on their managers, kind of what you know if you followed any of the cooperative discourse on the internet. That's kind of what you initially imagine. A consumer cooperative is essentially where consumers have formed a cooperative, and they collectively decide things, you know, certain purchasing decisions essentially. So you have the consumer have more power and more unification when it comes to being able to deal with the power relations that exist between consumer and company. It's essentially like a union for consumers, so to say, where you have better control over demand and where your money goes. So it makes things like, for example, boycotting a lot more efficient. It makes the agreement for terms that you can present companies with and being like, hey, fix this and this and this about your products, or you're not going to be able to buy from us, and stuff like that. At least that's how I currently understand consumer and worker cooperatives and the differences therefrom. And that's why it's important to distinguish between them, because they're two pretty fundamentally different things, right? When it comes to what they do and how they operate and stuff like that. But yeah, that's the way I would answer that question. You were actually saying something at the beginning, and then I interrupted you to ask you to introduce yourself. But you were giving a bit of a story about your kind of political inclinations and what brought you to talk about worker cooperatives.
That's not that important, I guess. Like, so I used to be like a centrist, liberal, social democrat, and then I started dwelling more into the research. I was not convinced for a while that worker co-ops could actually work. I read some basic research on it, and then it basically was your video, sorry, your research that made me dwell into these things, because it made the information more accessible. I think that was the major thing. And then I just started thinking about in the context of utilitarian philosophy, because that's what I study. I realized that it makes a lot of sense that a slow progress into this kind of system is something that would be quite beneficial. There's also another question in the chat from my side, if I may. Yeah, so the question is, how would you argue for co-ops in knowledge and capital incentive sectors like research? What are the existing model examples, or how would it work hypothetically?
Can you ask that question again?
Of course. So how would you argue for co-ops in knowledge and capital incentive sectors like research or academia?
Okay. So it's so this once again, in this question, you presume the idea that I want worker cooperatives necessarily in these different industries, and that I want them to be there and I want them to exist, and I have kind of some ideological motivation for wanting them to be there. Most of the policies that I prescribe are not by any means like, oh, the government will put cooperatives in these places. Most of them are just going to be like, hey, let's give cooperatives a leg up right now to kind of see how they perform, and then we'll see what happens when we cut back some of those and see how that affects the markets and stuff like that. So it kind of gives like an even kind of leg up to all cooperative firms. So assuming that we give cooperatives an equal leg up throughout the entirety of the economy, and as we know, there are different industries where cooperatives perform better and some where cooperatives perform worse. Some of the ones that they would perform worse I would imagine likely be things like really capital intensive industries and research. You would simply see them perform worse in those industries. And if that's the case, if they are unable to fulfill the needs that we want as a people, as a population from those different industries, then they don't belong in those industries. And we should keep to the conventional form of business for the moment within those firms until hopefully we find something better one day. But yeah, so in that question, you kind of assumes that I have like an ideological motivation to have them be in those industries. And my answer to that to be simply like, hey, if they do well in those industries, if they're able to perform well in those industries, then I want them there. If they don't, then I don't.
Yeah, that's a logical answer, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I can see in your chat that there is a great question, like a super intellectual one. Would you eat human flesh if it was legal and if they were dead?
You know what? I think it's been a bit unbalanced who's answered the most questions. I'm gonna hand that one over to you.
Of course, go for it.
So that's your question. Go for it.
Oh, no. This is a question from your chat, but like, if you want me to answer it, I guess I would. I don't mind. It depends on whether the person conceded after, being dead that I should eat their body. But other than that, no.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there would be a few concerns that I would have about that. So, for example, if the human flesh market operated similar to how, for example, the current meat market, then I wouldn't like that very much. But you said this is unfair because I say this right after you, and obviously, you probably wouldn't be favor of. Your example of this was if somebody specifically was like, "Hey, you can eat me after I die," then so that's a bit different. But for me personally, I don't think so. Given what I've read about human flesh, I've read that eating human flesh is like not good for you.
Oh yeah, it's really not good for you.
Yeah, it's really not good for you. Also, it causes like psychological distress because humans are like, don't fucking eat each other, biologically, from something I vaguely remember somewhere. But yeah.
But apparently it tastes really good. Like certain parts of human body tastes really good. That's all of the research I know.
Do you have any examples? Don't ask why I'm asking you for examples.
No worries. I know that the human liver tastes really good. So apparently it's much better than any other livers that we know of.
Okay.
But that's a research we have from like, self-reports from a lot of people from back when it was normalized.
Okay.
I don't know anything else from that topic. Sorry. My knowledge is limited here.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, okay. So my answer is that no, I probably wouldn't eat human flesh. So yeah.
But you would probably agree that if two consenting adults agree that after the death of one person, then you wouldn't mind, right?
Yeah, if two consenting adults were like, hey, you can eat me after I die, and the other one's like, okay, cool, then I don't think I would have it seems difficult for me to make like a moral issue with that. Unless it's the situation where there is a substantive risk for some weird disease to arise through one human eating another, and through them doing that, they end up creating like an externality from that interaction, in which they have like some new disease and infect everybody else, in which case I would have a big issue with it. But if it remains self-contained, then it seems difficult to make any moral arguments against that. Yeah.
I have one more question on worker co-ops here. So the question would be, so you distinguish between different types of these worker co-ops, and even in your paper, and then do you think it's a good idea to keep, let's say, profit motive within the company? So would you support something like, how would I describe it? Like a market where you could actually share, like buy shares and stocks of that company, or do you think that's something that's already too much of like a capitalist incentive? Like, do you think that this model could work?
The model of still allowing for external shareholders.
Yes, they would not own the company, as in like, yeah, they would just get the profit from the company. Like, is that something that's fine with you, or?
Yeah, so I'm going to give some background information to people that may not know. In my document, I distinguish between 5 different types of firms, 3 of which are worker cooperatives, arguably depending on what definition. Now, there's no objective definition for a worker cooperative, but they can be argued to be so, and 2 of them fall more within the conventional firm categories. Now, these 5 firms, 3 of them I've named myself, 2 of them have more established names. The first one being a complete autonomous cooperative. Essentially, this is a cooperative firm that functions as a cooperative and therefore does not allow non-voting shares to be bought externally, does not allow non-voting shares with board seats or board observer rights to be bought externally, does not allow non-controlling voting shares to be bought, and obviously then also doesn't allow controlling voting shares to be bought. So essentially, no external things at all. Everything is internal. Everything is owned by people who work there. No external shareholders. Then there are autonomous cooperatives that allow for some external buying of shares. However, those shares are non-voting. So external shareholders can buy part of the firm, and they have a vested interest, and they benefit monetarily when that company does well, but they may not vote on any of the way that this company handles their things. They're simply along for the ride, and they can make money if the company does good, and they don't make money if it does bad, essentially. Then there are majority cooperatives, which allow for non-voting shares to be bought, and even voting shares to be bought, as long as those voting shares are not controlling. So as long as you have 51% of the shares within a company be owned by the workers who work there, you can have 49% be owned by external shareholders, because it's not like a controlling voting share that can be owned externally then. All these 3 are arguably still cooperatives to different extents. And if there is a spot for autonomous and majority cooperatives, so cooperatives that do allow external shareholders to different extents, and we see that they perform well, and they don't like reduce any of the benefits that have been associated with worker cooperatives, then yeah, sure, go for it. Once again, this is really the thing I want to underline about all of this. For me personally, and I think this is different from how Vosh does it, for me personally, I have no ideological motivation towards cooperatives or conventional firms. Simply, all I care about is what has the best outcomes. That is all. And if there is a spot where autonomous or majority cooperatives perform well and there's a niche for them, then sure, 100% go for them. There's spots where conventional firms go well, go for it. There's spots where complete cooperatives go well, then do that there. I don't care, just whatever works best. That's all it's really about at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's quite reasonable. I also have like another question. If I don't know how much time you have, I don't want to take all of your existence on this.
No, it's fine. We can go a little bit longer. That's fine.
Okay, so so in the question, in the paper, you discussed also the Freewriter's problem, and that apparently also proves that it's not that big of an issue. So I have not understood why. So like, why Freewriter problem wouldn't be an issue when in this case?
Yeah, so Freewriter problem is kind of something that would be more handled with internal company policy, right? So you can see theoretically how, hey, if there is a system where if your coworkers perform well, then you get a benefit, even though you may not necessarily have performed like super well yourself, then there might be an incentive there for some people to slack behind and just be like, my coworkers got this, they will secure my higher wage. Of course, that person would secure an even higher wage if they tried themselves, but we can't discount the probability that they're like, I'm satisfied enough with the extra revenue that is going to be brought in by my coworkers working hard. I can kind of slack off and do whatever. That's a concern that you're going to have. However, that is not something that is solved systemically. That is something that the company needs to address itself with its company policy. So if the company then realizes and is like, hey, we realize that Mark, he's been slacking off. He hasn't been doing his bit. And if the people decide like, hey, there's something wrong here, then they're going to do basically internal firm disciplinary action to be like, hey, Mark, get your shit together. We're not going to allow you to slack off. We can see your performance here compared to everybody else. If you don't improve your performance, we're going to collectively vote you out, essentially. So the Freewriter problem is something that can theoretically exist, assuming that you don't have good enough management. And it's still something that exists even in conventional firms, although to a lesser extent, right? If you're sitting on a team in a conventional firm and you're not doing anything and your entire team is being paid a wage, then you're benefiting off the work of other people and you're not really putting anything in. So this is a problem that could exist within conventional firms as well. And the solution is the same to that problem in conventional firms. You need to have like internal and like company policy prescriptions and solutions for people who kind of like slack off and are like exhibitions of the Freewriter problem when it comes to stuff like this. So yeah, it's not a huge issue. It's a theoretical possibility. It is a theoretical possibility within conventional firms as well. It happens within conventional firms, probably happens within cooperative firms. And the solution to that is something that internally the firm has to work out on its own.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, fair enough.
But
I don't have any more questions on my part. I don't know if your chat is still wondering something.
Let me see. Hold on, there's something. Actually, we're going to okay, so here's one. Actually, regarding your point where you said that co-ops may not work in every industry, in that case of co-ops not working in an industry, would there be an equally fair/moral alternative for workers to level the playing field between them and the business owners / minimize any exploitation of the labor? Yes, unions. Perfectly fine there. From everything I've seen, unions for the most part do perform really well. And if, for example, it turns out that hey, worker cooperatives aren't appropriate for whatever research for super capital intensive industries, then it doesn't mean that we need to go to the most diehard capitalistic mode of production there. There are still things that we can do to get some benefits for the workers who work there. So having, for example, unions within those industries, they're able to balance out the power between labor and capital and therefore assure better conditions for the workers there and an improvement in their well-being, then yeah, they should do that. So yeah, like the co-ops are just part of the puzzle, right? And so are unions, and they can be implemented there in industries where co-ops work less well, but it's still really important to balance out the discrepancy of power between labor and capital. For that, unions are perfect. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then final question for you, and I think this is unless you have a new one, this is probably where we might call after this.
Sure.
So how many kindergartners could you fight to the death if they work as a group?
Ooh, that's a really good one. I'm actually
in Minecraft, by the way.
In Minecraft, of course. Actually, CIA.
Maybe villagers. That's what we're talking about.
Actually, CIA already caught up on that, so they know that in court you can use you cannot use in Minecraft as a prevention of terrorist attack. So you need to use like Roblox or Fortnite.
Okay, in Roblox. In Roblox.
Anyway, so I'm actually quite good at wrestling and jiu-jitsu, so I would say that if it's like kindergartners age 3, I would assume that like 100 might be fine, because I would just like run away and then pick up different ones, slam them on the ground, and that's it. But if they're like 6-year-olds and they already know how to, let's say, cooperate, then it will probably go lower. So it really depends on the age of the kindergartners.
Of the Roblox kindergartners.
Yes. Thank you very much for the characters.
Very clear. Yes. Okay. Excellent. All right. I will absolutely have to edit that part out for the YouTube video. So no Zoe.
However, in case if I may promote myself on your channel, if you have any kind of Czech or Slovak audience members, my name is Debatní Deník. I stream in this local language. So in case someone is interested, I would love to see them around. Anyway. Yeah,
I've left a comment. I'll add the link as well. So yeah, and for your audience, I've been Roserist. You'll find me. My major thing will probably be my YouTube channel. I upload pretty much every day, almost. You know, the days I don't upload, we don't talk about those days. But yeah, Roserist, 2 words. Rose like the flower, wrist like the body part. And yeah, you can check out me over there. And I've added your link now to all of my chats, so they can all see where you're at. But yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for the conversation. It was really pleasant. I'm looking forward to maybe hearing from you one day as well, if you need something from a Czech person.
Yeah, of course. No, it was a great conversation. I appreciate it. All right, bye-bye.
Bye.